The box had no right to feel important. Yet it sat in the middle of the room as if it carried secrets too strange to ignore. Its cardboard edges were worn, softened by time and careless handling, and its flaps leaned outward like open arms waiting for judgment. Dan was the first to give in. He stepped closer, bent at the waist, and lifted one of the items with a cautious grip. "Well, this is a good box," he said in a tone that suggested the opposite. "We got a bloody foot on a hook, and a dissected alien." Jackie leaned in beside him, her curiosity stronger than her sense of caution. "And some tax returns," she added, flipping through a stack of papers. "Ooh, the IRS believes we have a home office." That sentence lingered longer than the others. It always did. Words like that had a way of turning humor into something slightly more real. Dan exhaled slowly, as though he could push the idea away with breath alone. Before the moment could settle, the front door burst open. Becky entered like a gust of wind that had been waiting all day to be released. "You guys are not going to believe it," she said, her voice bright and unfiltered. "I passed my driving test." Silence followed, but not the empty kind. It was full of memory, of shared experiences that made the announcement feel both surprising and inevitable. "Apparently, it is pass everyone day," Dan replied. Becky placed her hands on her hips. "Come on. I am not that bad a driver." Dan turned toward her with deliberate slowness. "I let you drive home, and you made a garbage truck swerve," he said. "You do not see something that big up on two wheels every day." It was like he was stopping at every house. Becky argued. "That is what they do." Dan answered calmly. "And then to finish up, you dragged a traffic cone most of the way home." Jackie nodded. "Luckily that kid's skateboard broke it loose," she added. Becky groaned. But there was no real frustration behind it. This was how love worked here. It came wrapped in sarcasm, delivered through teasing, reinforced by presence. "I need a drink," she said. "Becky, where do you keep the hard stuff?" "In Becky," Jackie answered. The rhythm returned, familiar and grounding. Becky stepped closer again, shifting from defense to negotiation. "So, can I use Grandma's old car now?" Dan did not hesitate. "Yeah," he said, "but not to drive." Becky blinked. "You can sit in it and play the radio and go vroom vroom." He continued. "Your imagination is the road to anywhere." For a moment, Becky considered arguing again. Then she smiled instead. It was easier that way. And sometimes, easier was enough. Still, reality had a way of pushing back. "I really do need the job," she said. Jackie raised an eyebrow. "And boy, do I love house cleaning," Becky added, holding up a flyer. Jackie leaned in to read. "It is topless," she said. Becky paused. "Well, that explains the $40 an hour." Dan straightened. $40 an hour? Do they take men?" Jackie glanced at him. "Because I will show off the girls for that," Dan added proudly. Becky shook her head. "I am going to have to pass," she said. "But I will give your number to my sister." "Thank you," Jackie replied warmly. The conversation shifted again as Becky clapped her hands, pulling attention back to herself. "All right. Since I have got you guys here together, I want to show you my costume." She stepped back, presenting herself with dramatic flair. Disemboweled cheerleader. Jackie took a moment to process. "Look at you," she said finally. "All gory and sexy." Becky smiled. "Pleased. I am bringing a friend to the party," she said. "It looks like it is starting to be a thing. So I wanted to show off a little leg. A little intestine." Dan made a quiet face that said more than words. "He is a lucky guy," Jackie added. "His name is Peter," Becky said. That name hung in the air like a test. "Oh, Peter," Dan repeated slowly. "I want your opinion." Becky pointed at him. "I do not want you teasing him," she said firmly. This family has a history of chasing off all the unstable men that I bring into my life. Dan nodded thoughtfully. But Peter is different. Becky insisted. Dan echoed her words. Peter is different. I am serious, she said. No teasing. Do not worry. Jackie said. We will be good. Dan leaned back. Yeah. You have not dated anyone in like forever, he said. We are not going to mess with whatever straggling animal you picked off the back of the herd. Becky rolled her eyes. But the tension dissolved into laughter. That night, the house transformed. Costumes filled the space with absurd creativity. Each person carried their own version of what Halloween meant, stitched together from humor, memory, and imagination. All right, everybody, get in here, Dan called. We have got to get this photo in by 9 o'clock. Napoleon Bonaparte is here, someone announced proudly. At your service, came the reply. The room buzzed with movement, with small corrections, with laughter that felt earned. So what do we get if we win this thing? Becky asked. The scariest family gets a case of beer and a 6-foot sandwich. Dan answered. That feels right. Becky said. But not everything aligned as easily. Across the room, Mark stood quietly, holding his phone like it carried something heavier than its weight. Mom, he said softly. I sent a picture of my costume. They said I cannot wear it. Darlene turned. Why not? Because it is based on a violent video game, he said. The room shifted again. Do not worry, she said quickly. I will take care of it. But sometimes taking care of something meant walking directly into a situation that did not want to be solved. Rules had been written, guidelines set, intentions framed as protection. And in the middle of it all stood a child who simply wanted to participate. Later, when Mark stood in his carefully made costume, he looked proud, until the moment he was told no. Not because he meant harm, but because the world was trying so hard not to hurt anyone that it had forgotten how to see him. Darlene stood beside him. Sometimes the good intention of a rule goes too far, she said. Rules are rules, came the reply. And just like that, a door stayed closed. They left together. Not defeated, but quieter. They walked past houses glowing with light, past laughter that drifted into the street, past the feeling of something missed. Why do people make things so complicated? Mark asked. Darlene looked ahead. Because they are trying to do the right thing, she said. They just do not always get it right. Back at home, life returned to its usual rhythm. Dan sat with Becky. What do you think about Peter? She asked. He is nice, Dan said. Nice, Becky repeated. He knows a lot, Dan added. And he is not shy about sharing it. Becky laughed. That is fair. Dan paused. I think I might hate him, he said. But I need more time. Becky threw her hands up. I knew you would try to destroy this. Dan shrugged. It is a gift. The room filled with laughter again. Because nothing about them was perfect. But everything about them was real. And somehow, that was more than enough. The box had been sitting in the corner of the living room for 3 days before anyone bothered to open it. It was not unusual for the Connor household to accumulate mysterious objects. Life moved too quickly, and curiosity often had to wait behind exhaustion, bills, and whatever small chaos the day decided to bring. Dan finally kicked it gently with his boot and said, All right, this thing has been staring at me long enough. Darlene glanced over from the couch. If it explodes, I call not cleaning it up. Fair, Dan replied. Crouching down, he opened the box with the careful skepticism of a man who had seen enough in life to expect the unexpected. Inside, nestled among crumpled newspaper, was a rubber foot with fake blood painted onto it, hanging from a hook. Well, Dan said slowly, this is a good box. Darlene leaned forward, squinting. We got a bloody foot on a hook. Mark, who had been scrolling on his phone, looked up. Is that supposed to be art or Halloween? Depends, Dan said. If it's expensive, it's art. If it smells weird, it's Halloween. Darlene reached in and pulled out another item. And a dissected alien. Of course there is, Dan said. Why wouldn't there be? She dug deeper. And some tax returns. Dan froze. Now that is the scariest thing in here. Darlene smirked. The IRS believes we have a home office. Dan stood up immediately. We do not open that part of the box. Before anyone could respond, Becky burst through the door, glowing with excitement. Oh my God. You guys are not going to believe it, she shouted. Dan winced. Please tell me you did not adopt another animal. I passed my driving test. Becky beamed. There was a moment of silence. Darlene blinked. Apparently it's pass every one day. Becky rolled her eyes. Come on. I'm not that bad a driver. Dan crossed his arms. I let you drive home once. You made a garbage truck swerve. Becky shrugged. He was stopping at every house. That's what they do, Dan said. And then, Darlene added, you dragged a traffic cone most of the way home. Becky paused. That was temporary. Luckily, Dan said. Some kid's skateboard knocked it loose. Becky sighed. I need a drink. Becky, where do you keep the hard stuff? Dan pointed at her. In Becky. Despite the teasing, there was warmth in the room. It always came back to that. No matter how chaotic, how sarcastic, how brutally honest they were with each other, there was something unbreakable beneath it all. Becky hesitated, then said more quietly, So can I use Grandma's old car now? Dan considered this with the seriousness of a man weighing both risk and insurance premiums. Yeah, he said finally. But not to drive. Becky stared at him. You can sit in it, he continued. Play the radio. And go vroom. Vroom. Your imagination is the road to anywhere. Darlene snorted. Becky crossed her arms. I really do need a job. What kind of job? Darlene asked. Becky hesitated. House cleaning. Dan nodded approvingly. Honest work. Becky added. Topless. Dan choked. Darlene blinked. Well, that explains the $40 an hour. Dan immediately said. Do they take men? Becky glared. No. I could show off the girls, Dan insisted. Darlene raised an eyebrow. Please don't ever say that again. Becky sighed. I'm going to pass on that one. But I gave the number to my sister. Dan nodded thoughtfully. Good call. Later that evening, the living room transformed into something entirely different. Halloween had always been a big deal in the Connor house. Not because they loved fear, but because it gave them permission to laugh at it. Darlene stood in the center, arms outstretched. All right. Since I've got you guys together, I want to show you my costume. She turned slowly. Disemboweled cheerleader. There was a pause. Dan nodded. You look committed. Gory and sexy, Becky added. Darlene smirked. I'm bringing a friend to the party. It's starting to be a thing. Dan narrowed his eyes. A thing? Yes, Darlene said firmly. And I do not want you teasing him. Dan held up his hands. We would never. Becky coughed. This family, Darlene continued, has a history of chasing off all the unstable men I bring into my life. Dan said, we do not chase them off. They run. This time is different, Darlene insisted. His name is Peter. Dan nodded slowly. Peter. Yes. And no teasing. Fine, Dan said. We'll be good. Becky added. You haven't dated anyone in forever. We're not going to mess with whatever straggling animal you picked off the back of the herd. Darlene glared. Thank you for the support. Despite everything, there was excitement in the air. Costumes were assembled. Jokes were flying. And for a moment, life felt simple. That feeling did not last. The next morning, chaos returned in a different form. Mom, Mark called out. I just texted a picture of my costume to Joey. He says they're not going to let me into the school carnival. Darlene froze. What? They banned a bunch of costumes, Mark said. You were supposed to get an email. Darlene grabbed her phone. Hold on. She scrolled, frowned, and groaned. There it is. Dan looked over her shoulder. Important. It was hiding between get in shape today and your breakfast may be killing you, she muttered. Mark crossed his arms. This isn't fair. Darlene read aloud. No costumes that are scary, gory, or culturally offensive. Dan blinked. That eliminates our entire family. It's Halloween, he added. 24 hours without rules. That's not Halloween, Mark said. That's those movies you like. Darlene sighed. We have 2 days. We'll figure something out. Mark looked down at his costume. I worked really hard on this. Darlene softened. I know. And in that moment, something shifted. It was no longer about rules or emails or school policies. It was about a child who had created something he loved, and the quiet fear that it might not be accepted. That night, as the house filled again with laughter and noise, Darlene found herself thinking about that more than anything else. Peter arrived shortly after. He was polite, thoughtful, and he talked. A lot. Did you know, Peter began, that Halloween originates from an ancient Celtic festival? Dan blinked slowly. Darlene smiled tightly. Here we go. Peter continued. Undeterred. It marked the transition between seasons, when the boundary between worlds was believed to blur. Dan nodded. I got Jell-O with eyeballs in the fridge. Peter beamed. Exactly. Despite himself, Dan found it hard not to like the guy. He was odd. Certainly. But harmless. And there was something genuine about him. Later that evening, the family gathered for the school carnival. Or rather, they tried to. I'm sorry, the principal said firmly. He cannot enter in that costume. Mark stood still. Darlene stepped forward. Why not? It may be considered offensive, the principal replied. Darlene took a breath. Or it may be considered appreciation. The conversation went on, circling the same arguments, the same frustrations. Rules versus intention, policy versus individuality. And in the end, the answer was still no. They walked away. Mark was quiet. Darlene knelt beside him. I'm sorry. Mark looked up. That was kind of cool. Darlene blinked. What? You standing up for me, he said. Darlene smiled. Come on, she said. Let's go find our own Halloween. They did not go back to the carnival. Instead, they wandered through quiet streets, past old houses and older memories, laughing about nothing and everything at once. Because sometimes, the best moments were not the ones planned. They were the ones created. Back at home, Dan watched them return, tired but smiling. He shook his head. So what did we learn? Mark thought for a moment. That sometimes people are wrong, he said. Dan nodded. Fair enough. And somewhere between the jokes, the arguments, the costumes, and the quiet understanding that followed, the night settled into something simple. Not perfect, but real. And in that, it was more than enough.